Hai, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. So today, I would like to present about ionic compound. So before we start, my name is Noor Ezzati binti Emran. Ionic compounds is a compound that contains cation and anion. Both ions are held together by the attractive force called as ionic bond. Cation is a positively charged ion, while anion is a negatively charged ion. The atom that losing one or more electron will form cation. Otherwise, if the atom is gaining one or more electron, it will be an ion. Hence, ionic bond is occur when valence electron of a metal atom are transferred to the non-metal atom. Now, let's look at the example. Based on this diagram, we can see that the sodium atom is losing an electron while fluorine atom is gaining an electron. Therefore, sodium atom become positive charged ion, which is known as cation, while fluorine atom become negative charged ion and it's known as anion. In addition, if we refer to the periodic table, we can see that the sodium atom is a metal atom while the fluorine atom is a non-metal atom. Therefore, the compound of NaF, or the name is sodium fluoride, is one of the ionic compound. Here are some examples of ionic compound: sodium bromide, potassium bromide, sodium chloride, sodium fluoride, potassium iodide, potassium fluoride, calcium chloride, potassium oxide, and magnesium oxide. Now, we already know what is the ionic compound. Basically, the ionic compound is a combination between metal atom and non-metal atom by the attractive forces called ionic bond. So, here are some guidelines that you guys can follow about how to name the ionic compound. It consists of 4 steps, which is: firstly, we need to identify the cation and the anion. Secondly, name the cation by its element name. Next, name the anion by using the first syllable of its element name followed by IDE. And lastly, we write the name for the cation first and then followed by the name of the anion. Now, let's look at this example. For the first example is NaF compound. Basically, we know that the first step that must we do is identify the cation and anion. So from this compound, the cation is Na plus, while the anion is Cl minus. Next, we name the cation by its element name, which is sodium, and the anion that ends the element name by IDE, which is fluoride. Therefore, this compound is named as sodium fluoride. For the second example is FeCl2. So first, identify the cation, which is Fe2 plus, and the anion, which is Cl minus. Name the cation by its element name, which is ion, and the anion, chlorine, and ends that element name by IDE. So, the anion name is chloride. Therefore, we can name this compound as iron 2 chloride. Next, how to write the formula of the ionic compound from its name. To form the formula from the compound names, it consists of 3 steps, which is the first step is we need to identify the cation and anion. Next, we need to balance the charge ion. And lastly, write the formula cation first using subscript from the charge balance. To more understand, let's do some example. So, the first example is iron 3 chloride. As usual, the first step is we need to identify the cation and anion. So, from this compound, cation Fe3 plus, while the anion is Cl minus. Then, we need to balance the charge ion. To balance the ion charge, we need to multiply the Cl ion with 3. So, the formula for the iron 3 chloride is FeCl3. Next, for the second example is nickel 2 sulfide. So, the cation is Ni2 plus, while the anion is S2 minus. Next, we need to balance the charge ion. So, based on the figure, we can see that the charge ion already balanced. Therefore, the formula nickel 2 sulfide is NiS. CaCO3, or the name is calcium carbonate. As we can see, the calcium carbonate is a compound that consists of 3 atoms, which is calcium, carbon, and oxygen. The question is it the calcium carbonate is one of the ionic compound? The calcium carbonate is a compound that consists of anion and cation. The cation is calcium ion, while the anion is carbonate ion. If we realize the anion for this compound is consists of 2 atoms, which is carbon and oxygen. Now, let's see what is the polyatomic ions. The word of poly is referred to 2 or more, while the meaning of atomic is atoms. So, the meaning of polyatomic ion is a group of atoms, usually of different elements, that consist of non-metal atoms such as phosphorus, carbon, nitrogen, sulfur, and oxygen that act as a single ions. For example, in CaCO3 or calcium carbonate, the carbonate ions, which is CO3 2 plus, is known as polyatomic ions. Polyatomic ions have either a positive or negative electrical charge, but usually they have a negative charge, except for the ammonium NH4 plus, which has a positive charge ion. How to name the polyatomic ions? The most common name for polyatomic ions that contains oxygen atom is ending with ATE. For example, phosphate. This polyatomic ions is consists of phosphorus atom and oxygen atom, and the charge for this polyatomic ion is -3. Next is phosphate. If we compare phosphate ion with phosphate ion, we can see that the atom of oxygen in phosphate ion is less than from the phosphate ion. In phosphate, it has 4 atom oxygen, while in phosphate, only 3 atom oxygen. Therefore, if ion has 1 less oxygen, its name will be ends with ITE. When H atom is added, the negative charge will be reduced by 1. Phosphate ion is -3, but when the phosphate ion is added with H atom, the charge becomes -2. Hence, we can name this polyatomic ion with biphosphate or hydrogen phosphate. However, for cyanide ion and hydroxide ion, they have exceptions to these rules that have been explained. Both polyatomic ions are special case, so we need to memorize it. The last one is polyatomic ions that consist of halogen atom and oxygen atom. From this combination, it can form 4 polyatomic ions, which is perchlorate, chloride, chloride, and hypochlorite. The differences between these 4 polyatomic ions is the number of oxygen atom. But the electrical charge for these polyatomic ions is remain same, which all these 4 polyatomic ion is -1. Now, how to form formula of ionic compound with polyatomic ions? To form the formula of the ionic compound with the polyatomic ions, it is same goes as the step that we already discussed before. So there are 3 steps, which is first, identify the cation and anion. Second, balance the charge ion. And lastly, we can form the formula. The properties of ionic compounds. Ionic compounds have high melting and boiling point. Because of it, they are very strong and require lot of energy to break it. Secondly, the electrostatic forces of attraction between oppositely charged ions, which is cation and anion, can lead to the formation of ions. The third point is the form of ionic compound is crystal. Fourth, electrovalent compounds usually dissolve in water and insoluble in solvents. Besides, the ionic compounds do not conduct electricity when it in the solid state, but they do conduct electricity in the molten state, which is liquid. Lastly, in comparison between the molecular compound and ionic compound have higher enthalpies of fusion and vaporization. We realize that the chemistry cannot be separated from our lives. All things in this world are made up of chemicals. So, let's move to the example of the ionic compound that we use in our daily life. First example is sodium chloride. Sodium chloride, also known as salt. I believe that all of us know what is the salt. Sodium chloride is made of the sodium and chlorine atom. Generally, the uses of sodium chloride are in cooking and to put on food, so the food will become more tasty. Yummy! In addition, it also used to make some chemicals. Properties which allowed sodium chloride to be used are: it is edible, also non-toxic. Sodium chloride is soluble in water, and lastly, it appears as small white crystals. Next, calcium carbonate. Calcium carbonate, also known as chalk. Yes, chalk that usually used by the teacher to write on the blackboard. Calcium carbonate is compound that made of from calcium, carbon, and oxygen atoms. It is used for writing tools as we explained before. Otherwise, calcium carbonate also can be used to treat high phosphate levels for patients with kidney disease. And the properties which allow it to be used are it is insoluble in water and it is non-toxic compound. The last one is sodium bicarbonate. This compound consists of sodium ion and bicarbonate ions. It is made of salt, hydrogen, and oxygen atoms. The uses are for cooking. Baking soda is widely used to baking a cake because it can help to make the cake become more fluffy. Next, it can help to reducing stomach acid, especially to people who having gastric problems. Other than that, treating heartburn. And lastly, sodium bicarbonate is used for cleaning. The properties which is allowed it to be used is it has pleasant odor, non-toxic, and colorless liquid. So, there are some examples of ionic compounds that we use in daily life. Now, let's try some practices to test our understanding. Here are two questions that you guys can try. For the first question is, name the K2O. And the second question is, find out the formula for the calcium chloride. So that's all from me. Thank you and Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.